then you don't get any awards for that. But that, the thousands of letters I got, that was what happened all the time. People said, it is exactly how I thought. That's you and my Jesus.
Few television productions have left behind as many mysteries as the 1977 miniseries Jesus of Nazareth. Nearly 50 years later, people still talk about it, not simply because it told the story of Christ, but because of the strange and unforgettable events that unfolded behind the cameras. For many who worked on the production, it often felt as though they were witnessing something far greater than the making of a television series. Even today, stories from the set continue to fascinate audiences around the world. Some sound extraordinary, others are difficult to explain. After all, how often does an actor arrive expecting to audition for Judas, only to become one of the most iconic portrayals of Jesus ever seen on screen? And how do you explain hundreds of extras, many with little knowledge of the Gospels, suddenly breaking down in tears during the filming of a simple sermon scene? To understand why those moments still resonate today, we have to return to the beginning. In the early 1970s, Franco Zeffirelli stood among the most celebrated filmmakers in Europe. His adaptation of Romeo and Juliet had earned worldwide praise. His operas filled some of the greatest theaters on earth, and his name had become synonymous with artistic excellence. To outsiders, his life appeared complete. Yet success had not silenced every question within him. When the idea of creating a television epic about the life of Jesus first emerged, Zeffirelli approached it with a passion unlike anything he had experienced before. This was more than another project. It became a personal mission. He wanted viewers to encounter a Jesus who felt real, not a distant religious figure, not a painted image hanging in a cathedral. He wanted someone whose presence would be so compelling that audiences could not look away. Finding that person seemed almost impossible. Robert Powell was certainly not the obvious choice. At the time, he was a respected British actor, but not the kind of performer people expected to carry a production of this magnitude. When he walked into the audition room, he wasn't there to play Jesus at all. He had come to audition for Judas. Powell had studied the character carefully. He prepared himself to portray the disciple whose betrayal altered the course of history. Every line, every gesture, every emotion was focused on bringing Judas to life. But as he performed, someone behind the camera noticed something entirely different. Cinematographer Armando Nanuzzi watched him through the lens in silence. Then, turning towards Zeffirelli, he made a simple observation that would change everything. "If Judas has eyes like these," he said quietly, "what kind of eyes must Jesus have?" The words hung in the air. Years later, Zeffirelli would describe the moment as though a puzzle had suddenly solved itself. It wasn't the result of careful analysis. It felt more like an instant recognition. The audition for Judas ended on the spot. Instead of discussing the role of the betrayer, the production team escorted Powell directly to the makeup department. Hairstylists, costume designers, and makeup artists immediately began experimenting. They wanted to see whether this British actor could somehow embody a figure who had inspired faith, art, and devotion for nearly 2,000 years. Then something happened that no one in the room expected. A seamstress entered to make final adjustments to the costume. As she looked up and saw Powell standing there fully transformed, she froze. For several seconds, she could not speak. The items in her hands slipped to the floor. Slowly, she dropped to her knees, made the sign of the cross, and began to pray. Those who witnessed the scene would later insist that it wasn't merely surprise. The emotion on her face suggested something deeper, something she herself had not anticipated. The room fell silent. Zeffirelli watched carefully. Then he looked at Powell. In that moment, he believed he had found the face he had been searching for. What followed was one of the most unusual preparations an actor had ever undertaken. The director became obsessed with a single idea. Throughout the Gospels, people often reacted to Jesus before he even spoke. There was something about his presence, something about his gaze, that seemed to penetrate directly into the hearts of those around him. Zeffirelli wanted audiences to feel that same sensation. To achieve it, he gave Powell an extraordinary challenge. He asked him not to blink on camera. It sounds simple until you try it. Blinking is one of the body's most natural reflexes. We do it thousands of times every day without even thinking about it. Yet scene after scene, Powell trained himself to suppress the instinct. The result became one of the most memorable elements of his performance. Viewers often felt as though his eyes were looking directly into their souls. Whether they were religious or not, many found his presence impossible to ignore. The makeup department quietly enhanced the illusion. A subtle line of dark eyeliner was applied above the eyes, while a thin white highlight was added below them. The effect was nearly invisible, yet on camera it made Powell's naturally blue eyes appear almost luminous. Crew members monitoring the footage began reporting a strange reaction whenever the camera moved into a close-up. It wasn't fear. It wasn't discomfort. It was something harder to define. Many described it as the unsettling feeling that comes when you encounter something that seems familiar and mysterious at the same time. Something that captures your attention before your mind can explain why. And as production moved toward the crucifixion scenes, the experiences surrounding Robert Powell would become even more intense, leading to moments that many involved in the miniseries would never forget for the rest of their lives. For the crucifixion scenes, Robert Powell was determined to make the suffering feel authentic. He wasn't interested in creating the illusion of exhaustion through acting alone. Instead, he pushed his body into a state where fatigue would become real. For nearly 2 weeks, his diet was reduced to little more than cheese. The goal wasn't weight loss, it was depletion. Day after day, his energy faded, his muscles weakened, and the strain slowly etched itself across his face. By the time cameras rolled, he no longer had to perform the look of a man approaching physical collapse. The weariness was already there, visible in every movement and expression. Yet physical exhaustion would turn out to be the smallest challenge he faced. During one of the first crucifixion takes, Powell was suspended on the cross with his arms stretched outward while crew members secured the structure. Suddenly, the rope supporting the crossbeam began to slip. For a terrifying instant, everything hung between control and catastrophe. Had the crew reacted even a moment later, the accident could have been devastating. Technicians rushed forward and managed to stop the fall before it became fatal. But not before Powell was injured. He hit hard enough to tear the skin on his arms and bring filming to an immediate halt. Medical personnel were called, equipment was lowered, and the entire set stood in stunned silence. After receiving treatment, Powell made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He wanted to continue. That determination would become characteristic of the production itself. Again and again, those involved found themselves experiencing moments that felt far more intense than a normal television shoot. Perhaps the strangest phenomenon was not dramatic at all. It was silence. Whenever Robert Powell appeared on set dressed as Jesus, an almost unexplainable quiet seemed to settle over everyone present. No announcements were made. No assistant director demanded silence. There were no flashing warning lights or shouted instructions. Yet conversations faded away on their own. Jokes stopped midway through sentences. Crew members who had been laughing moments earlier suddenly lowered their voices. Veteran camera operators later admitted that they often found themselves whispering during Powell's scenes without consciously deciding to do so. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even respect in the ordinary sense. The closest comparison many could find was the feeling of entering a cathedral. Nobody has to tell you to lower your voice there. Instinct does it for you. Powell became aware of this atmosphere and made a deliberate choice. Rather than breaking the illusion, he protected it. Throughout filming, he kept his distance from the actors portraying the disciples. During meal breaks, he rarely joined group conversations. He avoided casual social gatherings and tried not to be seen joking around in costume. He understood that if the cast and crew were to react naturally on camera, they needed to encounter Jesus, not Robert Powell, as much as possible. The effect was remarkable. One of the most memorable examples occurred during the filming of the Sermon on the Mount. Hundreds of local residents had been hired as extras. Most were there simply to earn a day's wage. Many knew little about the story being filmed and had no particular emotional connection to the gospel accounts. Zeffirelli intentionally gave them very little direction. He wanted genuine reactions. So the crowd was allowed to sit, listen, and respond naturally while Powell delivered the Beatitudes. The day itself seemed almost cinematic. Sunlight streamed across the olive groves and cypress trees surrounding the location. Cameras rolled quietly as Powell began speaking. Then something unexpected happened. At first, it was only a few individuals, a tear here, a trembling lip there. But within minutes, emotion spread through the crowd like a wave. People began crying, not a handful of extras, hundreds. Men and women who had arrived that morning expecting nothing more than a day's work suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by emotions they could not explain. Some openly wept, others covered their faces. Many struggled to regain control even after filming stopped. When Zeffirelli finally called cut, the tears did not stop. Production assistants moved through the crowd trying to comfort people. The next take had to be delayed because so many extras remained visibly shaken. And perhaps most surprising of all, Robert Powell himself broke down. At the time, he did not consider himself a deeply religious man. Yet standing there beneath the afternoon sun, surrounded by the beauty of the landscape and the emotional response of hundreds of people, he found himself overcome. Years later, he recalled the moment. Franco Zeffirelli had timed the filming perfectly, capturing the exact instant when sunlight poured through the olive trees. As Powell spoke the words of the sermon, the beauty of the scene struck him with unexpected force. Emotion overwhelmed him, and tears filled his eyes. Zeffirelli saw what was happening and made an immediate decision. Keep filming. The tears visible in the finished miniseries were not planned. They were not part of the script. They were real. As production continued, another curious pattern emerged. Whenever Powell walked through holding areas, production corridors, or gathering spaces filled with extras, people instinctively stepped aside. No one instructed them to do so. There was no protocol requiring it. Yet again and again, people moved out of his path. Some lowered their heads, others simply stood in silence as he passed. A few even made gestures more commonly associated with prayer than with filmmaking. Zeffirelli witnessed these reactions so often that he eventually stopped trying to recreate them. Instead, he began capturing them. Several moments that appear in the finished miniseries contain reactions that were never scripted. The reverence visible on many faces was not acting. It was spontaneous. For reasons that even those present struggled to explain, people seemed to respond to Powell's presence differently than they responded to anyone else on set. And as filming moved closer to its conclusion, the stories surrounding Jesus of Nazareth would only become more extraordinary. What makes the story of Jesus of Nazareth so fascinating is that none of the people who witnessed these events ever tried to present them as obvious miracles. In fact, their descriptions are far more restrained than that. And perhaps because of their restraint, they feel even more compelling. Again and again, cast and crew members spoke of a strange sensation that developed throughout production. A feeling that the line between the story being portrayed and the reality surrounding it had somehow begun to blur. Not disappear entirely, but soften. As if the world of the gospel and the world of the film set occasionally overlapped for a brief moment. The cameras seemed to capture something difficult to define. The crowd seemed to respond to something they couldn't fully explain. And at the center of it all stood Robert Powell, who often appeared just as surprised by the reactions around him as everyone else. When Jesus of Nazareth finally premiered in April 1977, its impact was immediate. The miniseries was broadcast in more than 100 countries and eventually reached an audience estimated between 300 and 500 million people. Critics praised its artistry, its performances, and its remarkable attention to historical detail. Yet the most extraordinary response came not from newspapers or television reviewers. It came from ordinary viewers. Letters began arriving from around the world, not hundreds, thousands. Many weren't simply thanking the filmmakers for creating a memorable production. They were sharing deeply personal experiences. Some spoke of renewed faith. Others described long-broken relationships that had been restored. Many wrote about a feeling they struggled to put into words, a sense that something lingered with them long after the final credits rolled and the television screen went dark. For Robert Powell, however, the experience left a different mark. He had entered the project as a professional actor. Like any serious performer, he approached the role with disciplined preparation and complete commitment. He expected challenges. He expected hard work. What he did not expect was how profoundly the role would alter the course of his life. No acting class could have prepared him for what it felt like to spend months inhabiting such a figure, and no career guide could have prepared him for what happened afterward. Most actors dream of delivering a performance so memorable that audiences never forget it. Powell achieved exactly that. Ironically, it became his greatest obstacle. Rather than opening doors throughout the film industry, the role often seemed to close them. Directors admired his work. Producers respected his talent, yet many hesitated when it came time to cast him in new projects. The problem was surprisingly simple. People no longer saw Robert Powell. They saw Jesus. How could audiences accept him as a criminal, a detective, a politician, or an ordinary man struggling with ordinary flaws? How could viewers watch that familiar face lie, cheat, betray, or commit violence on screen after associating it so strongly with the image of Christ? Again and again, the same concern surfaced, and little by little, opportunities became harder to find. It was a strange and almost cruel paradox. the more successful his portrayal became. The more difficult it became for audiences to separate the actor from the role. In a sense, he had succeeded too completely. The image had become inseparable from the man. And that raises a question that still lingers decades later. What exactly caused the extraordinary reaction surrounding the production? Certainly, Powell's dedication played a role. But many actors have undergone extreme transformations for their performances without producing effects like these. Zeffirelli's direction was undoubtedly brilliant. Yet he had directed acclaimed productions before and after Jesus of Nazareth without witnessing entire crowds break down in tears or crew members fall into unexpected silence. Perhaps the answer cannot be found in any single element. Perhaps it emerged from the rare convergence of many things happening at once. A director obsessed with authenticity. An actor willing to disappear completely into the role. Hundreds of extras responding without coaching or manipulation. And above all, a story that had endured for nearly 2,000 years because it continued to touch something deep within the human heart. The people involved often seemed to be responding to more than a performance. They were responding to what the performance awakened, to something ancient, something familiar, something that transcended the boundaries of a television production. For a brief period on a film set overlooking the Mediterranean, one of history's most enduring stories appeared to come alive in a way that no one had anticipated. Not as history, not as theology, not even as entertainment, but as something that felt remarkably present. More than 4 decades have passed since those cameras stopped rolling. Many of the people who were there are now elderly. Some have passed away. Yet when survivors speak about those months, there is often a noticeable change in their voices. A pause, a reflection. Almost as though they are remembering a place they visited long ago. A place they can never return to, yet one that never truly left them behind. And perhaps that is why Jesus of Nazareth continues to endure. Not because it answered every question, but because it left viewers with questions they still carry today. So now I'd like to ask you something. Have you ever watched Jesus of Nazareth? Was there a particular scene that stayed with you long after the film ended? Was there a moment that moved you in a way you still struggle to explain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely love to hear your story. And if this journey through one of television's most remarkable productions has inspired you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss future stories. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.